All right. So yeah, I hope you all had in some interesting discussions. We're not so much for this assignment worried about like right answers or anything like that. I mean, in large part, I was sort of hoping with a lot of these questions, you would just be like, yeah, that is a good question. You sort of start to see some of the problems and complexities that we're going to be confronting as we continue to go through logic this semester. Really, a lot of what you are all talking about today are issues that we're going to try to come to answers in as the semester goes along. So if we are face to face, what I would do is I would actually sort of have you all tell me what you all talked about. That's a lot harder to do with all this digital stuff. So I'll probably just talk my way through some of those questions a little bit, just to reveal some of the issues maybe that you all might have seen, and then we'll call it for there until next week. So, yeah. So the two big arguments I had you look at within Clifford. The first one I think is probably the easier, the most straightforward. If you believe false things, that has negative consequences in the world. Not any sort of great surprise. I mean, we see the last I don't know what year and a half has shown that there are indeed dangers to certain kinds of false beliefs. And so, yeah, one reason why you might have an ethical duty to go about forming your beliefs in responsible ways, Clifford argues, is simply because if you don't and you form false beliefs as a result, that will negatively harm you. And then through Facebook, Twitch, TikTok, Reddit, whatever, then you can spread that harm to everyone else and get other people to formulate false beliefs too. So, first argument, you have an ethical duty to avoid causing harm, and forming your beliefs irresponsibly can cause harm. All right. The second one is maybe not more important, but I thought the second one was a little bit more interesting, maybe. So Clifford's second argument has to do with sort of habit formation. And, most of the time, most of our beliefs probably aren't that important, right? So, I brought up as examples from last class. We're going to talk about things like Star Wars movies and Taylor Swift albums, and like the stakes are pretty low about what we believe in those contexts most of the time. Don't necessarily tell people on Reddit or Twitter that, but most of the time those beliefs are pretty low stakes, right? The consequences aren't huge. Whereas there are other beliefs where we expect the consequences to be more explicitly dangerous if we go wrong. And the reason we're going to talk about both kinds of things, both kinds of topics in the class, is because I actually think Clifford brings out a good point. We act kind of habitually if we get in the bad habits when we're thinking about things that don't matter. We're going to be likely to bring those same bad habits with us when we're talking about things that do matter. And that's a real potential harm. Why? Again, because of these negative consequences that can come about from formulating false beliefs. And then particularly, since we've got so many ways of sharing our beliefs and sharing the way we came to our beliefs with other people, then we can spread all of this harm to other people. I had a friend when I was in college who was super into conspiracy theories. And for him, this was in the early 2000s. So for him, he was super into 9/11 truthers. If you people are all familiar with this, these are people who think that 9/11 was an inside job carried out by the United States government. And so he was super into these theories. YouTube didn't exist yet, but I promise you, if YouTube did exist, he would have been making crazy YouTube videos about those theories, right? And yeah, let us say, I'll talk a little bit. I used him as an example a little bit later in the semester as we continue to go along. But let us say the reasoning by which he was coming to his conclusions was not great. Let us just say he was not engaged in careful, thoughtful inquiry. And he could spread that not careful, not thoughtful way of approaching these topics through these social media networks. That's at least the modern fear. One of the things that makes it so it's harder to engage in logic and critical thinking, sort of in the 2020s now, than it did in the early 2000s. So let's move on to some of the other discussion questions. So for those you sort of we're asked to move a little bit beyond the article, what would we need to do in various sorts of ways to live up to this very high standard that Clifford sets out for all of us? So the first one I asked you all to talk about is what actually counts as evidence for a belief. And again, my hope was that through talking about this, you discover that that's a very good question. And the answer is not necessarily at all obvious. and seems as if it really is going to vary based on what we're talking about. I was reading an article earlier today where it was a bunch of scientists debating whether or not a particular object that had been detected in space was alien or not, whether could it have been an alien spacecraft. All right, if we were going to gather evidence about that topic, what kind of things would we look for? Well, we gather observations about the object, maybe look at how it was moving, look for radio signals, yada, 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 right? And all of that would count as evidence in that kind of discussion. But let's say we're having an ethical discussion and we're looking for evidence in an ethical arena. None of that stuff I just mentioned is going to be relevant. Right? What are we going to measure if we're having an ethical conversation? At the very least, it's not going to be the same kind of things. We're not going to be able to weigh anything on scales or anything like that, or like take photographs of things. What's going to count as evidence in an ethical conversation, like Clifford is doing in this piece, is going to be really different than what counts as evidence in a science conversation. And what's going to count as evidence if we're talking about Taylor Swift albums? Again, I guess we could measure stuff, but like, how loud was the album? Like, that's not going to be super helpful. That's not going to be super relevant. What's going to count as evidence in that kind of discussion? Again, it's going to look different. We're going to have to look at different things. And so that will be a topic we definitely hit as the semester goes along. What actually counts as good evidence for different kinds of questions? The next discussion question I gave you sort of just almost makes this worse or sort of amplifies it. How do we actually go about gathering evidence when it seems like you need to be a specialist in a field to actually know what it is you're talking about? My guess is, unless some of you are advanced physics students, most of you probably have no idea what the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics even is, I'm assuming, let alone what the many world interpretation of quantum mechanics even is, let alone having any idea how you would even begin to go about figuring out which was the better interpretation. You would need, and I'm barely capable or qualified of doing it myself, you would need an enormous amount of specialized knowledge in quantum mechanics, it seems like, before you could even begin approaching such a topic, before you would know almost what kind of evidence counted as good evidence, what kind of evidence is relevant. Another example of this. I am indeed a doctor, I have a PhD, but I would encourage all of you not to ask me any medical questions, because I'm not that kind of doctor. Right? You don't want my advice about your heart problem or whatever. It's not going to go well, right? But all of us, most of us are not doctors, medical doctors. We have to make medical decisions all the time. How are we going to do it? Right? I mean, I have to figure out, my back's hurting. What do I do about it? Maybe what kind of food should I eat? Real practical day-to-day concerns, but I'm not a medical expert in the field. How can I gather information and evidence about topics that seem to require expertise to actually know about them? Again, this is a serious problem, a really difficult problem. One that, we're going to work on. There's actually be a whole chapter in the textbook really about that problem and things that sort of spring out from it. It's probably the most important conversation we're going to have this entire semester, I think, actually. It's chapter 6 in the textbook. And it's where we really are going to have to figure out, what do we do with all of the cases where it seems as if human beings really require specialized knowledge to have anything useful to say on the topic. And most of us don't have that specialized knowledge. How do we form rational beliefs about topics that we aren't experts in ourselves? Right? It's a difficult topic, a serious topic, and a timely topic, one that actually seems like it increasingly is coming up when I watch the news or whatever. The issues pertaining to what do we do with expertise seem to be increasingly pressing. A few other ones that I asked you to talk about. I asked you to talk about where your beliefs actually come from. And my guess is when you sort of tried to take stock of it, your conclusion was, yeah, I don't actually know. It's actually really hard to figure out where beliefs actually come from. And this has potentially negative consequences in logic and critical thinking. You've all probably had this experience of talking to people who sound like maybe they're having a conversation. Maybe they look like they're presenting evidence or giving reasons, but you just probably have discovered after maybe a couple minutes that the person does not believe what they believe because of anything that they're saying. They already believe what they're saying, and then they're just retroactively trying to come up with reasons to justify their pre-existing belief. Right? And this is a serious danger. We all have a tendency to do this. I'm not trying to pick anyone. We all have this as a tendency, right? Because we don't know where our beliefs come from. A tendency to sort of rationalize in the bad sense of reason, right? Where we sort of come up with reasons to justify things that we already believe. That's really contrary to the actual spirit of logic, though. The whole point of logic is to believe things because of the evidence rather than to find evidence because of what we believe. Getting it backwards in a very real sense. And so it's a danger we'll need to worry about, and it's a danger we'll need to talk about how we can try to avoid in the course of sort of looking for evidence and finding the right kinds of evidence, evaluating different kinds of evidence. And then the last one I asked you all to talk about today is the question of how possible it is to do what Clifford is talking about, right? I mean, the ethical standard he's laying on all of us in this piece, it's really high. If all of you had an ethical duty to only formulate beliefs about things that you have really carefully investigated for yourself, that's your day. You're not going to be doing much of anything else in the course of your days, right? And even then, you're probably not going to get it done. We have so many beliefs about so many different topics. If we had to go all out investigating all of them, I'm not going to be able to get out of bed in the morning, let alone go to work, go to class, spend time with my wife. Just not going to be able to do any of it, right? And this is, again, how can we be responsible believers and also live human lives? This is a serious question, a difficult question. There's a philosopher, you might have heard of him. He's probably one of the more famous philosophers, Descartes. He's the guy who said, "I think, therefore I am." So you might be familiar with him. He actually tried this as an experiment. He was like, okay, I'm going to not believe anything that I can't rigorously prove for myself. And for those of you who have studied a little bit of Descartes, what happened? He ended up discovering that there was nothing he actually was confident he could believe in anymore. Because when he tried to rigorously prove everything, he discovered there wasn't very much that he could prove to his satisfaction, or at least prove once and for all, prove with absolute certainty. So that can't be the goal. That's too high of a standard. It's too high of a bar. We're not capable of doing that. How can we be rational believers in the course of living our normal lives? Right? What does this look like in the course of living a normal, happy human life? And again, that's something we're going to look at, talk about, work on as the semester goes along. So yeah, my sort of hope is that now you've come to see at least some of the problems anyway, that logic and critical thinking will be helpful tools to help us resolve, help us deal with. So does anyone have any thoughts, comments, or questions about anything from the discussion, from the article, anything? All right, awesome. Then this is probably a great place for us to end for the day. You don't have to remember, you don't have to turn the discussion for today in. We're going to wait to have real assignments until next week when the ad drops are pretty much settled, so people aren't getting behind in that regard. For Tuesday, we will sort of begin more normally what the class is going to look like. The ad drops should mostly be done by that point. So for Tuesday, what I'd like you to do, my hope is you all are at least getting close to having the textbook. So the textbook is this one. Right, Reason and the Balance. My hope is you're all at least getting close to it. If not, you don't have it quite yet. I know you're probably a lot of you ordering things from online. Could take a while. If you have it, read chapter 1 in the textbook for Tuesday. If not, it's probably fine. You can probably wait till Thursday to do it. I'll probably make a PDF available of it in case there are any sort of stragglers for the Thursday. But if you have it, read it right away for Tuesday's class. There's also for Tuesday's class a video that I posted that's sort of the lecture, so I don't have to lecture on Zoom because that's really boring for everyone. So watch the video. It should be about 10 to 15 minutes long, so it shouldn't be too long. It's basically be going through the material in the textbook. Have that ready before you come to class. And then there are quizzes. We'll do the first of these sort of pre-class quizzes for Tuesday as well. The quiz is based on what I discussed in the video. So do that quiz. It's on Canvas. 3 questions, multiple choice, short answer, not even short answer, true, falsey kind of stuff. So it should be pretty quick. Do that quiz before class starts. Remember, you can take those quizzes as many times as you want, and Canvas tells you if you've gotten the answers right or not. So take it as many times as you need to get the answer right. Maybe if there's a question you struggled on, go back, watch that portion of the video again. Guess if you need to. Just find the right answer. I want you to all do really well in these, right? Get a sense of the answers. You bring in any questions you've got to the class sessions. We can talk about any questions you had about the quizzes. when we come into class. Just make sure you get the quizzes done prior to the class session because they close basically once class starts. So just make sure you have them ready. And then we'll also do another sort of group activity in the Tuesday class session as well. I'll probably have a little bit more of a preamble before we turn to it. But there will be a groups activity that we did then. And then that'll be the first one that you all turn in. So we'll go over it together once you discussed it in your group in class, go over what the quote right answers are. And then everyone can just submit that into Canvas. So you'll have a pretty good set of homework grades in the class starting on Tuesday. So that's pretty much all I've got. Anyone have any questions about anything? Someone was asking about what Clifford's third article was. Since I only gave you 2 in the excerpts, Clifford's third argument, interestingly, was actually a political one. It was basically that to be a good citizen, you actually need to be concerned with formulating beliefs in the right way. It was interesting. I just didn't want to give you too much to read. But yeah, it was basically sort of a Thomas Jefferson-y kind of argument that to be a good citizen is to be someone who cares about formulating beliefs in the right way. And so that was his third argument for why we have this sort of ethical duty. Good. Any others? All right. Have a wonderful weekend. Enjoy yourself. And I will see you all on Tuesday. Have a good one.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you.